Hello, I'm Tom Adams, one of the co-founders of 60 Decibels, and this is a short 10-minute or so interview with someone I admire and whose work I think is fantastic. So today I'm having a conversation with an old friend, someone I've learned an awful lot from over the years, Jeremy Nicholls. So Jeremy, firstly, it'd be lovely to hear a bit about your story, about the work you've done to bring you to this point, and some of the things you're passionate about with regards to social value.
Hi Tom, good to see you again. Well, I say see here, listen to you. So I started this really back in the days of being a university student around economics, specifically development economics, and learning and thinking about the imbalance of power that had arisen through history within our global economy. And then forgot about that, became an accountant, which kind of was a bit of a mistake. But not so actually, because it's turned full circle. But I escaped accountancy by spending 4 years as a house parent, and then started to get into the world of sustainability, social enterprise, all these kind of issues that we now know and love. And then about 15 years ago, founded with others Social Value International, and was the chief executive for a while. And that's the organization that is a network globally of people of all sectors who are trying to manage the impact of their work more effectively. And as we've done that, we've become closer back to the mainstream world of accounting again, to find out and discover that it's not really designed to have the kind of effective outcomes that we really want to see if we're serious about reducing climate change, reducing wealth inequality, and improving people's well-being generally.
Brilliant, Jeremy. One of the things that I've found most interesting and learned most from you in the conversations I've had over the years is around this idea of social value. And the reason I think it's so interesting is that for the most part, most social organizations are being told that they have to measure social outcomes. So social impact measurement or social measurement has had this primacy of attention. But you've always talked about social value. So can you tell me a bit more, explain a bit more about what you see as the key differences between social value and social measurement, and also how they relate to one another?
I'll have a go without trying to lose the will to live in the methodological debates that people have around the definitions. So we go back to some basics. This is about people's well-being in the end, and then it's about improving that well-being. And if we look at the state of the world, you think there's certain significant elements where massive increases in well-being are required. And things aren't getting better, they're getting worse. So that's what we're interested in. And we're interested in improving it. And so that is where we start thinking about value. The second big driver is the fact that most of the time, when we run around talking about having an impact, we're talking about impacting on other people, and those impacts, the people that experience those impacts can generally not hold us to account for what happens. And if you think about mainstream financial markets, investors have a lot of power. Directly, they can sell their shares. Indirectly, they can turn up at the AGM, sack the board. There's regulations. There's a whole infrastructure that's built up to protect them in order that they can basically make these investments, and we hope, and then everyone get a deal out of that, apparently. Now, that doesn't happen when we talk about social and environmental changes in people's lives, which we use the word impact for. Those people who experience those changes don't get to hold us to account. There are massive consequences for that in terms of improving people's well-being. So I think there are some people who say that social value and well-being are not really very different, and maybe not, but the social value bit is really about that expression of a desire to increase it, improve it, and has underneath it that recognition that we're not generally accountable for it. And I would, I could argue, I think that when we use the word social, we mean non-accountable, right? Or environmental, we mean non-accountable. So things we don't have to actually, we won't be held accountable for if it doesn't go well. And where well is a bit, what do we really mean by well? The kind of level of performance that is acceptable is anything better than zero seems to be okay, but clearly that isn't. So social value is a kind of parcel for a lot of the politics that are implied around what would a system look like if people actually could hold us to account. Measurement, yeah, well, you have to measure to be able to generate that value and to increase that value, but it is a means to an end. And for so much of the time, it's seen as an end in itself. You know, it's like, yeah, we've measured our impact. Here it is. Well, hey, in shock news, organization has positive impact, you know.
So this is what I've learned so much from you about Jeremy, and I think it's really important about this. It's about power, because if you just measure your impact, you are determining what success is, right? If you measure it at all, like, you know, but if you measure it, you say, this is what I set out to do, this is my log frame or whatever, and maybe you set a target to increase whatever metric by X amount, but you've determined what good is. You said, I've improved it by 5%, I now put it in a flashy infographic. Yep. That was what good is. And what you've always been saying, which I find so interesting, is, well, that's fine. You've essentially, you as the person with power, you as the person who set up an organization, you as the person who distributed finance, have put the value on it. So instead, I think where you lead is, it's the end beneficiaries that should be.
Well, I mean, even that is kind of this word beneficiary, you know, it's like, what's the reverse of a beneficiary? What do you call somebody who doesn't benefit? There's a word for that group of people. I mean, that already shows the bias in our system. We are already biased with this assumption that it's all good. And of course, it isn't all good. So unless we hear the voice of the people who are experiencing those changes, we stand no chance of realizing that there are both positive and negative experiences as a result of our work. We don't even have a word for it, you know? It's so blinded are we from this. So absolutely, we need to pick people who experience change and expect change at the heart of that.
So let me ask one more.
More than that, because if you do that, if you think about that in finance, that would be like saying, well, if the investor's at the heart of it, that means we have to go and speak to every single investor and go and check. But that's not what we do. What we do is we say, well, let's have a kind of general basis upon which we think investors want something, and we could debate whether that's good or bad, but that's how it works. And then we say, and let's have somebody else come along on their behalf and make sure that the organization has performed well against that, because we couldn't do it otherwise. Now in impact, we don't have a general statement. It astounds me the number of arguments you can have about, well, what's your purpose? Well, my purpose is to reduce negative impacts by a bit. Okay, well, whoopee-doo, because if you were held to account, that wouldn't be good enough. You would have to be creating as much possible positive impact as you could with the resources that you had as quickly as possible. But we're allowed to have all these different kind of purposes. But if we had that purpose, which I think would be a good starting point, you then need to have somebody who came along and audited the statements that these organizations were putting out about their impact. Because truth is, not because people are bad, but because we're humans and therefore we have bias. An organization that tells me that its impact is positive is like, not only is that kind of in shock news, I have no comfort that they have given me a complete story at all. I have no sense that I can rely on that I know that the negative outcomes are in there, let alone being managed. So we would need to have that in place as well. This kind of stakeholder involvement needs this bit of somebody acting in the interests of those people who is mandated to check, review, audit those kind of performance information, so that it's not just, did we go up by 5%, but to be honest, was that 5% good enough? You know, was it a high enough? Was it as well as the organization could do? What are the benchmarks of performance in comparison with other organizations? Then we might start to get somewhere.
Brilliant. So I mean, you hinted at it already. I was going to ask to end in the last couple of minutes about, you know, actually the practicality of doing that and placing values on sometimes amorphous topics and social impact. How is that done, and who gets to determine that value?
I think this issue about putting accountability at the heart, would be, if you were accountable, you'd have to be being transparent about how you've done that. The truth of the matter is that every single time we decide to spend money on something, we are saying, we think that is going to have the best results. Now, if we're an organization that wants to have a positive impact, we are saying, if we spend our money on this, we think that's the best way of doing it because it will have the best impact. Implicitly, we have looked at other options for spending our money, and we have decided that our chosen option has the highest impact. We have unavoidably valued a set of outcomes that we're going to create more highly than alternative sets of outcomes. So we have done valuation. You cannot avoid it. Of course, it is much more comfortable if you do it in the quiet of your own office when you've got the power to do that and you don't share anybody and it's your values and you don't have to defend them. Than if someone comes along and says, actually, do you know what? You should be transparent about how you've done that, and you should listen to the people who experience these outcomes to hear what they think about the relative importance of those different sets, and use that information to inform that judgment. So I think that's got to be the starting point. Whatever you do that's more transparent and more informed by people experiencing it will be better than you sitting there, I've got power, I know what the relative values are, I'll make the best decision. And if that's your starting point, then you don't have to worry too much about being super brilliant about this. This information isn't going to solve the problem, isn't going to be the answer, but it's going to lead to better choices in how you allocate your resources to create impact. So, I think that's so fundamental to the how, because otherwise everyone gets lost in a whole bunch of technical, economic-driven approaches to valuation, all of which you can critique because it is not possible to make interpersonal comparisons of valuation, and all of which is true, and all of which forget that despite that, you're going to do it anyway, every single time you spend any money on anything, So I'd rather focus on the implicitness of it and the fact that we need to do better than worry too much about arcane debates on the how. Now, in making those decisions with data, whatever that data is, and even if it includes some kind of valuations, you as the decision makers need to assess the risk that you'll make a crap decision. Yeah. So it's like, how bad does my information need to be to change my decision? I'm going to do A, not B. How bad would this information be to swap me to B? Should be what we're saying about this when we kind of worry about that. And when you decide the risk, you need to remember that you are taking risk on behalf of the people who experience the impact. So really, it should be their risk appetite. People talk about decision makers' risk appetite, but really what we're interested in is the risk appetite of the people who are going to experience it, in terms of whether that decision will be wrong or right, because they're the ones who are going to get the less positive impact or the increased negative impact in the end.
Jeremy, thank you so much. I mean, I could sit actually and listen to these questions all day. These are challenging issues and thoughts and concepts to get your head around. Where should people find out more?
Well, one of the challenges I think is, you're right, that there's a lot out there, isn't there? There's a lot of information out there. And so I think I'm always, a keen fan of the people who put stakeholder voice heart and central of all these issues. So Social Value International, obviously the UNDP and their impact standards, and that bunch called something decibels. You know them? Anyway.
Thank you. I didn't know that plug was coming, but thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time today, Jeremy. It's always a pleasure chatting to you. All right, that was good. It's still recording, but I can stop recording. Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was great.
No worries. What do you want?